Welcome. We are opening up the case file on one of the most enduring, fascinating, and frustrating mysteries in American history.
We are.
We're talking about the skyjacking of Northwest Orient Flight 305 on Thanksgiving Eve, 1971.
Done by a man known only by his alias, Dan Cooper, who later, through a media mistake, became famously known as D.B. Cooper.
Right. The name everyone knows is actually wrong from the start.
Exactly. And this incident, it's really a singularity in criminal history, especially for aviation. It's the only documented successful case of air piracy in commercial aviation where the person just vanished.
Completely. Never identified, never caught.
And what defines this story isn't just the crime, it's the sheer volume of forensic evidence, and a lot of that evidence is contradictory. It also caused this seismic shift in how we travel.
So our goal today is to really sift through the documents, the FBI reports, the testimony from the flight crew, all the forensic analyses, and try to assemble the clearest possible picture of this case.
We're going to look at the planning, the science, and that huge debate over whether he could have actually survived jumping into the wilderness.
Okay, so let's begin the story. It's November 24th, 1971, at Portland International Airport. Thanksgiving travel is kicking into high gear.
And the initial interaction is, well, it's surprisingly low-key for what's about to happen.
Almost mundane.
Completely mundane.
Yeah.
This man, who gives his name as Dan Cooper, he walks up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter. He pays in cash.
A key detail.
A very key detail. He buys a one-way ticket for Flight 305, which is just a very short 30-minute commuter flight north to Seattle.
And the physical description from those first eyewitnesses, it's quite specific, isn't it? It suggests a certain type of person.
Very. He was described as a white male, probably in his mid-40s. He had dark hair, brown eyes, and his clothes were just intentionally unremarkable.
A business suit.
A black or brown business suit, a thin black tie, a black raincoat, brown shoes. He's carrying a briefcase. He's basically the picture of an ordinary, maybe slightly weary traveler just trying to get home for the holiday.
So he gets on the plane, takes his seat, 18E, and he orders a bourbon and 7-Up.
A detail which, later becomes very relevant to his profile.
And then the aircraft takes off. At what point does this stop being a normal flight?
It starts very subtly. Soon after they reach cruising altitude, Cooper signals to the flight attendant nearest to him, Florence Schaffner. She was in the jump seat right behind him.
And he just hands her a note.
He hands her a folded note. And Schaffner later testified that she just dismissed it. She thought it was a lonely businessman trying to give her his phone number.
Something that probably happened all the time.
Right. It was common. So she just tucked it into her purse, unopened.
And Cooper, of course, couldn't have that.
He corrects her, but very quietly. He leans in, softly enough that no other passengers would notice, and he whispers something chilling.
What did he say?
The quote is, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb."
And the note itself?
The FBI later got it back. It was meticulously printed in neat, all-capital letters with a felt tip pen. It spelled out his demands.
So once Schaffner realizes what's happening, she told to sit next to him. And that's when he shows her.
Yes, a brief, terrifying confirmation. He opens his black attaché case just enough for her to get a look inside.
What did she see?
She reported seeing what looked like 8 sticks of explosive. They were red cylinders, arranged in 2 rows of 4, all wrapped together with wires leading to a large cylindrical battery. For all intents and purposes, it looked like a real, live bomb.
But our sources bring up a forensic point here.
Ugh.
The FBI later questioned what that device was actually made of, didn't they?
They did. Since Cooper took the bomb with him, they never got to examine it. But based on Schaffner's description of those bright red cylinders, agents thought they might have actually been highway flares or maybe railroad torpedoes.
Because dynamite isn't usually bright red.
Exactly. Commercial dynamite is typically brown or beige, but, they couldn't know for sure at the time. The authorities had absolutely no choice but to treat it as a live explosive.
So Captain Scott and the crew, they're now in a hostage negotiation. Cooper's demands, which get relayed first through Schaffner and then mainly through the other flight attendant, Tina Mucklow, were very specific.
Very professional and non-negotiable. He demanded $200,000 in unmarked American currency.
Specifically $20 bills.
Specifically 20s. To give you some perspective, adjusted for inflation, that's roughly $1.6 million today.
And he also wanted parachutes.
Yes, 4 of them. 2 reserve parachutes, which are worn on the chest, and 2 main parachutes worn on the back.
Let's pause on that demand. 4 parachutes. Why not just 1?
This is where you really see his tactical intelligence. By demanding 4, he's creating a very credible threat.
Yeah. that he might take a hostage with him.
Exactly. The implication was crystal clear. If the authorities tried to give him a non-functional or sabotaged parachute, he would risk the life of an innocent person who would be forced to jump with it. It completely eliminated the possibility of sabotage.
So for the next 2 hours, the plane is just circling Puget Sound while the ransom is being prepared on the ground.
And during that time, Tina Mucklow becomes the primary liaison. She spent more time with him than anyone.
What was her impression of his demeanor?
Her testimony is just vital. She described Cooper as being remarkably calm. She said he was not nervous, even rather nice.
Not what you'd expect.
Not at all. He wasn't cruel or panicked, which just defied the typical profile of a hijacker. His composure suggests either a lot of practice or just an incredibly steady personality.
She also noticed something else, something surprising. His familiarity with the local area.
Yes, that's a key point. At one point, he looks out the window into the dark and says, looks like Tacoma down there.
Which it was.
And then later, when the authorities told the cockpit the parachutes were coming from McChord Air Force Base, Cooper overheard it. He immediately commented that McChord was only a 20-minute drive from the airport, SeaTac.
That's a level of local knowledge that suggests he'd lived there, or maybe was stationed there.
It strongly points to prior residence or military service right there in the Seattle area.
And Mucklow actually asked him about his motive, why he picked Northwest Airlines.
She did, and he apparently laughed a little. He said, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airlines, it's just because I have a grudge."
A grudge in general.
A general grudge. And he clarified that this flight and this specific type of aircraft, the 727, simply suited his plan perfectly.
Which reinforces that this was all meticulously planned around the plane's technical specs.
Absolutely. The motive was some wider grievance, but the execution was all about the 727.
Okay, so the logistics of the ransom. The plane circles for 2 hours while the FBI scrambles.
They're photographing 10,000 $20 bills on microfilm. It's a painstaking process, takes a lot of time, but it was absolutely essential later on.
That was maybe the one successful piece of preemptive evidence gathering.
It was. That microfilm is how they identified the bills found years later. So the plane finally lands at SeaTac around 5:46 p.m. Al Lee, Northwest Seattle operations manager, is the one who delivers the 19-pound money bag and the 4 parachutes.
And Cooper had one more instruction for him.
He did. Lee was specifically told to wear civilian clothes to avoid any hint of official authority.
Once Cooper had the cash and the chutes, he kept his word. He released the 36 passengers.
And I think we really need to pause here and acknowledge the experience of those passengers, and especially the crew who remained. Captain Scott, First Officer Radazak, Flight Engineer Anderson, and of course, Tina Mucklow.
Their cooperation under that kind of pressure with a bomb threat was just instrumental.
Absolutely remarkable composure. After the passengers were off, Mucklow brought the parachutes to Cooper. The reserves came from a local skydiving school, the mains from a stunt pilot. She even offered him the printed instructions.
And he said...
He just brushed her off, said he didn't need them.
Then there was a delay during refueling and a slightly, an absurd moment.
It was. Cooper had told them to put the money in a knapsack, but they delivered it in a bank bag.
So what did he do?
He was clearly annoyed. The refueling was already taking forever. They needed 3 separate fuel trucks. So to solve the money bag problem, he pulls out a pocket knife.
Another sign of his preparation.
It is. And he cuts the fabric canopy away from one of the reserve parachutes. He just destroys it. Then he stuffs some of the money into the now empty parachute container, using it as a second bag.
It's a bizarre move.
It is. Destroying a perfectly good parachute to make a bag. It would become a huge point of contention later when people debated his supposed parachuting expertise.
So tanks are full. He has the money. Cooper then kicks off phase 2.
And this required an even greater level of technical knowledge. The new flight plan was a southeast course, supposedly toward Mexico City.
Which he would never make from Seattle.
No, not with the limits he was putting on the 727. It required a refueling stop in Reno.
And this is where the profile of Dan Cooper shifts, isn't it? It goes from smart criminal to something more like aviation insider.
It absolutely does. The instructions he gave for the aircraft's configuration were precise and, they were non-standard.
What were they?
He demanded a minimum airspeed, about 100 knots, a maximum altitude of 10,000 feet. He wanted the landing gear to stay down.
Okay.
The wing flaps lowered to 15 degrees. And this is key. The cabin had to remain completely unpressurized.
Let's break that down, because those are crucial details. Why the 15-degree flap setting?
That flap setting is the giveaway.
Yeah.
A Boeing 727 is a powerful jet. To fly at that slow 100 knots is only about 115 miles per hour, and that low without stalling, you have to deploy the flaps.
To get more lifts.
More lift and more drag. And 15 degrees is the absolute perfect setting to achieve that specific flight profile. Any pilot who didn't have very specific knowledge of the 727's flight envelope wouldn't have known to ask for that exact angle.
And the combination of low speed, low altitude, and an unpressurized cabin that served a dual purpose.
It did. First, it made the jump survivable. It mitigated the brutal wind chill and the lack of oxygen you'd face at a normal cruising altitude. But more importantly, that specific configuration forced the 3 pilots in the cockpit to stay intensely focused on manually flying the plane.
It basically tied their hands.
It completely incapacitated them. They couldn't try any evasive maneuvers or communicate detailed plans to the ground. They were just too busy flying the plane.
Cooper first wanted to take off with the aft air stair, the rear staircase already down.
Yes, but the officials in Seattle refused. They said it was too dangerous, so he conceded, saying he'd just deploy it himself once they were airborne.
Which brings us to Cooper's most profound and really unique piece of knowledge.
The aft air stair. The Boeing 727, with its 3 engines in the back, had this retractable staircase at the rear of the plane. It was designed so it could land at smaller airports without traditional jetways.
And Cooper knew its secret.
He knew its fatal flaw. He knew that the switch to lower that staircase, which was located in the rear of the cabin, could not be overridden by the pilots from the cockpit. Once it was activated, they were helpless to stop it.
That's a terrifying detail for an airline.
And it was information that civilian flight crews just didn't have. There was no normal scenario where they would ever need to lower those stairs in the middle of a flight.
Which led the FBI to speculate about his background.
It led them to believe he must have had specialized military or even intelligence training. The 727 was known to be used by the CIA during the Vietnam War.
Specifically by a group called MACVSO.
The Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, a special ops unit. They used 727s for covert missions like dropping agents and supplies into enemy territory. That connection points to a very specific, classified background.
So Flight 305 takes off again around 7:40 p.m., heading south toward Reno. And they weren't alone.
No. They were being tailed at a distance by 2 military F-106 fighters and a T-33 trainer jet. They were flying high above the 727, trying to maintain visual contact without being spotted by Cooper.
Shortly after takeoff, Cooper tells Tina Mucklow to go back to the cockpit.
Yes, he tells her to go into the cockpit, close the partition curtain, and not come back. That was her last interaction with him.
And she made one last plea.
She did. She asked him, please take the bomb with you, and Cooper replied he would either disarm it or take it.
And as she left, she saw him doing one last thing.
As she turned to close the curtain, she saw Cooper tying what looked like the heavy money bag around his waist. That was the last confirmed sighting of Dan Cooper.
The moment of his escape is marked very clearly in the flight data, isn't it?
It is. At 8 p.m., a warning light flashes on the cockpit panel. The aft stairs had been deployed. The crew said their ears popped because of the sudden change in cabin pressure.
And then, about 15 minutes later.
At 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section pitched upward, just for a moment. It was followed by a slight dip, which the pilots immediately corrected.
And the FBI was able to replicate that exact movement.
They did extensive tests. They used a 200-pound sled to mimic the weight of Cooper and his gear, and they pushed it out of the air stair. They confirmed that the moment that weight leaves the aircraft, you get that distinct, small, upward pitch of the tail.
He was gone.
He was gone. He jumped somewhere over the rugged terrain of southwest Washington. The plane continued on, landing in Reno at 11:02 p.m. with the stairs still down, and the search began.
Before we get into the physical evidence, we have to talk about the administrative mistake that gave this man his legendary but wrong name.
It's such a strange footnote to the story. The hijacker called himself Dan Cooper.
Just Dan Cooper.
But an early reporter, James Long, misheard or misrecorded the name as D.B. Cooper. And once that error hit the UPI wire service, it just stuck. D.B. Cooper became cemented in the public mind.
So, the plane lands in Reno. The FBI secures the crime scene. What did they find?
They found a few key pieces of forensic evidence right there in seat 18E. The main things were a black clip-on necktie and a gold mother-of-pearl tie clip.
The tie was traceable.
It was. It was from JCPenney, but that specific style of clip-on had been discontinued back in 1968. So that gives you a little time window.
And there was more.
Yes. They also found 8 Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette butts in the ashtray. and a single strand of what looked like a head hair on the headrest.
Which sounds like a forensic jackpot.
Yeah.
DNA everywhere.
It should have been. And this is where we have to discuss the immense investigative failure that has haunted this case for decades.
The loss of evidence.
The loss and destruction of definitive samples. I mean, it's one of the most frustrating parts of this whole investigation. They did manage to build a partial DNA profile from the tie in the 2000s, but it wasn't a complete profile.
But the other items...
The hair sample was just lost. It vanished while being stored on a microscope slide. And even worse, the 8 cigarette butts, which were just soaked in Cooper's saliva and would have guaranteed a full DNA profile, they were destroyed.
Destroyed by who?
By the Las Vegas field office years earlier. It was just a standard evidence cleanout. They were cataloged and then disposed of. The single most promising source of his identity was just eradicated by the investigation itself.
Which means they could never definitively link any of the thousands of suspects to the crime scene using DNA?
Never. It's a tragedy for the case. It meant every subsequent investigation had to hinge on that one piece of evidence that was left, the tie.
And that tie yielded its own fascinating, almost microscopic clues, but not until nearly 40 years later.
Right. That's the 2009 analysis. This was a team of citizen investigators. They used an electron microscope to analyze tiny particles that were clinging to the fabric of that tie.
And what did they find?
They found a very specific cocktail of metallic and rare earth elements, things like unalloyed titanium, bismuth, antimony, cerium, and strontium sulfide.
That combination is highly specific. What does pure unalloyed titanium tell you?
Back in the 1970s, pure titanium was incredibly rare and difficult to work with. It was used almost exclusively in highly specialized areas.
Like aerospace.
Exactly. In the fabrication of early jet engine parts and airframes, because it's so strong and lightweight, it points immediately toward the aerospace industry.
And the other elements narrowed it down even more.
They did. Cerium is used in specialized alloys, and strontium sulfide was used in phosphorescent coatings, like on old cathode ray tubes. The specific mix of these elements strongly suggested Cooper wasn't just a pilot or a soldier. He was likely an engineer, a metallurgist, or a supervisor in a high-tech manufacturing plant.
Maybe even at Boeing.
Possibly at Boeing's supersonic transport project, which was active then, or maybe a firm in Portland like Teledyne or Tektronix. It radically changed the profile from a desperate ex-military guy to a corporate insider.
But that highly technical profile, it just clashes with another fact, doesn't it? The fact that he jumped with a useless parachute.
That is the core contradiction of the whole case. How can a man with enough technical knowledge to basically fly a 727 from the passenger cabin, who knows about flap settings and the secret of the air stair, also make such a profound amateur mistake?
He took the wrong parachute.
He took a dummy parachute. Mucklow saw him cut the canopy from one of the reserves to use it as a bag. The rigger who supplied the chutes later testified that the other reserve, the one Cooper actually took with him, was an unusable training chute.
How was it unusable?
Its canopy had been sewn together for static line training exercises. It was completely useless for a free fall jump. A real expert would have known instantly by the harness and the feel of the pack that it was wrong.
So how do you square that circle?
The only way to reconcile it is to assume he was an expert in aviation mechanics and operations, but not necessarily an expert current skydiver. He knew how to get out of the plane, but maybe not how to land safely.
This all fed into the search efforts, which started with these computer models pointing to a drop zone near Mount St. Helens.
A massive search operation began. FBI, the Army, local law enforcement. But the terrain there is just brutal. Dense, old-growth forest. If he landed even slightly off target, finding him would have been next to impossible.
And for 9 years, nothing. The case went cold.
Almost nothing. There was one minor find in 1978. A deer hunter found the 727's instruction placard for lowering the aft air stair.
The little laminated card.
Right. And it was found 13 miles east of Castle Rock, which helped confirm the plane's general flight path during the jump.
But the real breakthrough, or maybe the real source of confusion, came in 1980 at a place called Tina Bar.
It was a momentous discovery. An 8-year-old boy, Brian Ingram, was on a family picnic digging a fire pit on a sandy beach along the Columbia River.
And he found money.
He found 3 packets of decomposed $20 bills totaling $5,800. And when the FBI checked, the serial numbers were a perfect match to the ransom money.
That should have solved it. Should have told him where he landed.
It should have. It suggested the money had washed down the Washougal River watershed into the Columbia. But the geological and biological evidence, it just introduced these huge conflicts with the timeline.
What did the geologists find?
A geologist named Leonard Palmer examined the site. He found two distinct layers of sand and sediment underneath the money.
Underneath it.
Right. And he concluded that the bills could not have been there before a major dredging operation that the Army Corps of Engineers did in 1974. The money was on top of the 1974 dredge spoil.
So, the money arrived on that beach years after Cooper jumped.
That's the stunning conclusion. And it gets weirder. They analyzed the diatoms, the microscopic algae clinging to the bills.
Okay.
Diatoms have seasonal growth patterns, and the types they found on the money indicated that the bills had entered the water during a spring bloom months after the November hijacking.
So if the money was deposited years after the jump, during the spring, it completely undermines the theory that he just died on impact and the money washed out soon after.
It shatters that theory. It implies one of two things. Either Cooper survived, held on to the money for years, and then discarded some of it near the river, or someone else found Cooper's body and the money, held on to it, and then for some reason dumped a portion of it into the river years later.
The money didn't solve the case.
It made the mystery exponentially more complex.
Let's try to synthesize all of this into a profile of the man himself. The FBI put one together in 1973, based mostly on what Mucklow and Schaffner described.
Right, the composite portrait. It described a man in his mid-40s, somewhere between 5'10" and 6 foot tall, weighing about 170 to 180 pounds.
And his features.
An olive complexion, brown eyes, and short, neatly combed back black hair. And witnesses all agreed he spoke without any obvious regional accent.
Though there was a slight discrepancy in the height.
A slight one. Some passengers thought he was a bit shorter, maybe 5'9", and described him as slight, which could mean the business suit was hiding his true build.
In the psychological profile, it suggested financial desperation, which seems to contradict how well-planned everything else was.
The FBI believed the motive was acutely financial. He was desperate, but he also had that underlying grudge he mentioned. They concluded he was not a common criminal.
He was too intelligent, too methodical.
And too self-reliant. His quick thinking, cutting up the parachute for a bag, and his insistence on getting all his notes and even his empty matchbook back, it all showed a keen desire to avoid leaving a trail.
His consumption habits also paint a very specific picture.
He was definitely a smoker. The FBI estimated he was a chain smoker, maybe a pack a day, based on the number of Raleigh cigarette butts. And even though he ordered that bourbon, he refused a second drink.
He was staying sober for the mission.
Absolutely. Maintaining total control for the technical parts of the escape.
And that alias, Dan Cooper, it still points heavily to a European connection.
It does. It comes from a French-language Belgian comic book series about a Canadian Air Force test pilot named, Dan Cooper.
And those comics were pretty much unknown in the U.S. at the time.
Virtually unknown. So the FBI theorized that the hijacker was either European himself or had spent a significant amount of time in Europe, maybe with the Air Force, where he could have encountered the series.
Which brings us to the biggest question of all. Did he survive the jump? For years, the official stance was pretty skeptical.
Initially, the odds were heavily stacked against him. The FBI's chief investigator, Larry Carr, argued very strongly against survival. He based it on the conditions and Cooper's lack of proper gear.
What were the main points against him?
First, the conditions were just lethal. He jumped into a 15-degree Fahrenheit wind chill at 10,000 feet, in total darkness, in a November rainstorm.
Second, his gear was all wrong.
Completely wrong. He was wearing loafers, a business suit, a trench coat, no helmet, no gloves, no survival equipment whatsoever.
And third, he had no plan for the landing.
He was jumping into dense, rugged, heavily wooded terrain without a prearranged escape or an accomplice on the ground. It was incredibly risky.
Carr had a famous quote about it.
He did. He said, "No experienced parachutist would have jumped in the pitch-black night, in the rain, with a 172-mile-per-hour wind in his face wearing loafers and a trench coat. It was simply too risky."
So the initial thinking was that he died on impact.
Or from hypothermia, or he drowned in a river. And this was reinforced by the fact that the rest of the ransom money never, ever showed up in circulation.
But the argument for survival, it started gaining a lot of traction, mainly because of the wave of copycats that followed him.
The copycat craze of 1972 completely changed the FBI's internal thinking. There were 15 attempted hijackings, just like Cooper's, in the year that followed. And crucially, several of those guys, who were often less experienced and less prepared than Cooper, they jumped and survived.
You're talking about people like Martin McNally.
Exactly. McNally tried a very similar hijacking just a few months later. He wasn't an experienced skydiver. He had to be shown how to even put on his reserve chute. He jumped at nearly twice the speed Cooper did.
And he survived.
He lost the money bag, but he landed completely unharmed in a field. Frederick Hahnemann was another one who jumped and was caught later. The evidence showed that even non-experts could survive that kind of jump.
And this forced the original lead investigator, Ralph Himmelsbach, to change his mind.
It did. Himmelsbach publicly revised his estimate. The consensus shifted from certain death to a pretty high probability of survival, especially since Cooper had controlled the plane's speed and altitude so precisely.
As one senior FBI agent put it,
He said anonymously in 1976, "I think he made it. I think he slept in his own bed that night. He could have just walked out, right down the road."
and the legal system seemed to agree with the survival theory, too.
Yes, in 1976, a grand jury indicted John Doe, a.k.a. Dan Cooper, for air piracy.
Which was a clever legal move.
It was vital. By indicting a John Doe, they ensured that they could prosecute him if he was ever caught, no matter how many years passed. It bypassed the statute of limitations. The FBI was ready for him to reappear for decades.
So the FBI ended up with this massive 66-volume case file. They went through over 1,000 serious suspects over 45 years.
Most were eliminated pretty quickly. Witness descriptions, fingerprint analysis, but a few key figures remained viable suspects for a long time.
We have to start with Richard McCoy Jr. He was the most famous copycat.
Absolutely. 4 months after Cooper, McCoy stages an identical 727 hijacking. Same demands, same method. He jumps, but he gets caught pretty quickly.
So why was the FBI so sure he wasn't the original Cooper?
The physical mismatches were just too big. McCoy was only 29, much younger than Cooper's estimated mid-40s. He had light blue eyes, protruding ears. Cooper had brown eyes.
And his habits were all wrong.
Totally wrong. McCoy was an observant Mormon. He didn't smoke or drink. Cooper was chain-smoking Raleighs and ordered a bourbon. McCoy was a copycat, not the original.
Another really interesting suspect is Ked Braden. His military background fits that CIA 727 theory perfectly.
Braden was a former Special Forces commando, a master skydiver with over 900 jumps. And critically, he had served in MAVSAG in Vietnam.
The same special ops unit that used 727s for covert missions.
The very same. He would have been exactly the type of person to have that classified knowledge about the aft air stair. He was 43 at the time, fit the general description.
So what kept him from being the prime suspect?
Well, his military record listed him at 5'8", which is a bit shorter than the flight attendants reported. And he didn't really have a clear motive for that grudge Cooper talked about, but that MCV-SOG connection is almost too strong to ignore.
Okay, next up is Joe Lakich. His potential motive is extremely compelling, and he also has a connection to the rare metals on the tie.
Lakich provides maybe the strongest motive for the grudge. He was a retired Army major. And just weeks before the hijacking, his daughter was tragically killed during a botched FBI hostage negotiation.
That would certainly fuel an intense grievance.
It would. And the forensic connection is there, too. Lakich worked as a supervisor at an electronics capacitor factory. That's an environment where he would have been exposed to those highly specialized metals, like the pure titanium and the rare earth elements they found on the tie.
Then there's the deathbed confession of Dwayne Weber.
Weber was a compelling suspect for a while. On his deathbed, he told his wife, "I am Dan Cooper." His habits matched the profile. He drank bourbon, he was a chain smoker.
And his wife remembered something else.
She did. She recalled a strange trip they took to the Columbia River area years after the hijacking. She remembered him throwing a trash bag into the water right upstream from Tina Bar, which could potentially link him to the recovered money.
But the physical evidence just didn't line up.
No. When the FBI got samples from Weber's remains, neither his fingerprints nor his DNA matched the partial profile from the tie. He was officially eliminated.
And more recently, in 2018, a new suspect was proposed, William Smith.
Smith was a World War II vet with naval aviation experience, so he had the aircraft knowledge. And his proposed motive was a grievance against the corporate establishment. He lost his pension after a railroad bankruptcy in 1970.
Which fits the grudge theme.
It does. The analyst who proposed him even found that the alias might have come from a name in his high school yearbook, an Ira Daniel Cooper. But like all the others, it lacked any definitive forensic proof.
So, despite all the public fascination, The FBI eventually had to close the active phase in the case.
In July 2016, they officially suspended the active investigation. They cited the age of the case, the lack of new leads, and just the need to focus resources on more urgent issues.
But they didn't close the book entirely.
No, they said they would still review any legitimate physical evidence that turns up, specifically the rest of the ransom money or the parachutes. The 66-volume case file is still preserved for historical purposes.
Ultimately, Cooper's biggest legacy wasn't the mystery itself, was it? It was the massive, permanent change he forced on global aviation security.
The audacity and success of his crime, plus all those copycat attempts, it was a huge wake-up call. It showed the world just how vulnerable commercial aviation really was. The reforms were swift and dramatic.
What were the immediate changes?
The most visible ones were mandatory metal detectors at all airports and mandatory baggage inspection, which started in early 1973. That fundamentally changed the experience of flying for everyone.
And they started watching out for people paying cash for tickets.
Exactly, a direct response to how Cooper bought his ticket.
And the Boeing 727 itself had to be physically modified so this could never happen again.
Cooper had exposed a fatal flaw in its design. So every Boeing 727 was retrofitted with a device they quickly named the Cooper vane.
What does that do?
It's a simple but brilliant piece of engineering. It's a spring-loaded wedge on the outside of the plane. Once the aircraft gets up to speed, the air pressure pushes the vane out, and it physically locks the aft air stair mechanism. You can't lower it until the plane slows down to land.
That one small device permanently sealed his escape route.
It did. They also mandated peepholes in all cockpit doors so the crew could see what was happening in the cabin without opening the door.
Beyond security, Dan Cooper has become this mythical figure in popular culture, a modern anti-hero.
He's the perfect American outlaw. It's a story that combines technical brilliance, audacity against the system, and the ultimate magic trick of vanishing without a trace. Even if he was, as investigator Ralph Hemmelsbach called him, a rotten, sleazy crook, the way he did it ensured his legend would live on.
We have spent time today meticulously examining the evidence around Dan Cooper, from that first encounter in Portland to the technical details of his escape and the scientific analyses that just seem to create more questions than answers.
And that central contradiction, it's still rooted in the physical evidence. You have this man with profound knowledge of a 727 who takes a useless training parachute. And most importantly, you have the evidence at Tina Bar, the sediment layers, the diatoms that completely challenge the timeline.
Suggesting the money wasn't lost immediately.
But was put into the river system years later, maybe after being stored by Cooper or by someone who found him?
So, as you consider the enduring mystery of the only successful unsolved act of air piracy, remember this crucial fact. If the recovered ransom money only arrived at Tina Bar years after the jump, what does that tell us about Dan Cooper's initial landing? And who buried or stored that cash before the Columbia River carried it away? The disappearance might not have been immediate, but calculated. Thanks for listening.